kind of almost like a dark night of the soul for the inner critic, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is my job. This has been my job my whole life. What do I do now? Hey Soul Surfers, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here and have not yet subscribed, we would love to have you in our community. Just click the subscribe button and you can click the notification bell to be notified when new content is posted. And if you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to silence that inner critic for good. Just get it to shut the heck up. Enough is enough. Well, I will tell you one thing, that trying to silence the inner critic does not work. Well, it does, temporarily. I have been trying to silence my inner critic my whole life, and I can usually get it to pipe down for a little while or for some periods of time, but it always cropped back up. And here is why I think silencing the critic does not work. Let's talk about the inner critic first. Let's talk about what it is and where it came from. So the inner critic is that part of yourself that tells you you can't do it. It may berate you, it may belittle you, it may talk you out of doing things you really love. The inner critic is really just afraid. The inner critic is kind of like an inner bully. It tends to bully us out of the things that we love in life. And so that's what the inner critic is. If you ever hear that voice that says, you can't do it, or that little like flicker of doubt, that's your inner critic talking. Now, where did this inner critic come from? Nobody like implanted a little person like in your head or anything, or a microchip or anything. The inner critic comes from conditioning and life experience that we've gone through. Typically, the critic comes from our childhood. Oftentimes, it comes in the form of things our parents may have told us if our parents were not supportive, or our parents or caregivers, whoever was predominantly around us as children. If they did not support us, or they doubted us, or they berated us, that typically becomes the voice in our head. Now, there are other people throughout life that can contribute to this voice or reinforce that voice, but I have found that that is typically where the inner critic starts, is in childhood. Because in childhood, we are extremely susceptible to the things that we see and hear around us. That's when we are most programmable. That's where we get our beliefs. That is where our subconscious programming takes place. That's the time in our life when it happens. So it's unsurprising that that is where the inner critic would originate. Okay, so now that we know what the inner critic is and we know where it came from, how do we get it to shut up? Well, it will quiet itself down. It's not going to shut up permanently, but it's going to not have such a stronghold on us. What I hear a lot is people say we need to ignore the inner critic. We need to just push it away, let it go, not deal with it, just shut it up and say, whatever, I'm doing this and I don't believe you. But the thing about the inner critic is that it is a part of us. And to me, it is a shadow aspect of us. Now, as I talk about in this video about what the shadow is a part of us that just wants to be loved and accepted. And the inner critic is no exception to that. I think it's helpful to understand that the inner critic is actually just trying to love us and protect us in its own way. It is loving us the way that it knows best. It's loving us in a way that we won't get hurt. The inner critic doesn't want us to be hurt. It doesn't want to see us in pain. So in order to accomplish that, it tells us things that will keep us away from the perceived danger. Even if it's something we love and we think will be fun, it's trying to protect us from possible rejection or possible pain or possible hurt. So the inner critic is not bad. The inner critic's just doing its job. It's just trying to keep us safe, trying to protect us, although it's not really in the, most loving way. It's doing it the most loving way it knows how, but it's not the loving way that we would like it to. And often it's protecting us from things that we do not need protection from. So instead of silencing the inner critic, what I've been doing lately is listening to it and holding space. So first of all, this phrase is very important, I think. What we resist persists. So when we resist listening to the inner critic, when we resist it and we try to push it away and ignore it, what happens is it eventually gets, I would say, so angry that we're not listening that it will start yelling. And that's why that voice gets louder and louder and louder, because as we're pushing it away and resisting it and ignoring it and not giving it space, it's just becoming more frustrated. So that's why, instead of resisting my inner critic like I have been for so long, because that just totally wasn't working. In fact, it made it louder and more rowdier as I got older. I started listening to my inner critic and holding space for it. Now, here's the thing, is that we can listen to something or someone or ourselves, but that doesn't mean we have to accept what it says. But we can hold space for it to speak its piece. So I actually kind of talk about this in this video here, where I talk about how to process your emotions and your feelings. You can use this same process with the inner critic. I'll link it here for you so you can check it out. But essentially, this process is validating the inner critic. It's integrating it. It's holding space for the inner critic. Letting the inner critic say what it has to say, because remember, if it's a shadow aspect, it's just a part of us that wants to be loved. So when that little voice comes in my head, I'll stop and I'll listen and say, okay, what do you have to say on this? How do you feel about this? And I let it speak. And then I will tell it, your feelings are valid, your thoughts are valid, and here's the key part that I tell it. I still love you even though you feel that way. And this may feel weird at first because we really want to push away rejection, but the most healing emotion is love. And as I've started to tell my inner critical parent that I love it instead of hate it, and that I don't want anything to do with it, and then it's not welcome in my life, the more it's calmed down. That grip that it has on me has really, really lessened. So instead of silencing your inner critic, let your inner critic guide you. Your inner critic really is just trying to tell you something too, because the inner critic crops up when it's experiencing something it's experienced before. So it thinks it's going to have the same outcome. So if we listen to it, tell it we love it, and redirect it and show it a different way and calm its worries and its fears, then the inner critic, like I said, it slowly goes away because we show it a new way of living. So befriending and loving the inner critic, to me, is the way to go in silencing it. Again, I don't think it will ever be fully silenced, but it will definitely be very minimal compared to the criticism that it has given me before in my life. And I've only been doing this for maybe a month now, and the changes have been so phenomenal. I have a lot less intrusive thoughts, I have a lot less negative thoughts, and I have a lot less doubt and fear over things. Changing the way that we talk to the inner critic can make a big difference. I mean, think about it. If somebody told me, if I had been with them for their whole life, and they told me, I don't need you anymore, I'd probably be pretty angry. I would feel rejected. I would feel, upset. I would feel like, what's my purpose? I kind of almost like a dark night of the soul for the inner critic, right? Oh my gosh, this is my job. This has been my job my whole life. What do I do now? So instead of saying things like, I don't need you, I don't care about you, you can give gratitude towards your inner critic, because even the inner critic has a good side. The inner critic has been protecting you and loving you the way it knows how. So thanking it for its service, but saying you don't need it to do that job anymore, instead of just tossing it out with the trash, because that would just feel awful. If somebody did that to me, I would feel pretty bad. So, the inner critic, I sympathize with the inner critic here. So even just giving gratitude for it and the job it's done, because really it has helped you survive for so long. But now it's time to exit survival mode and start thriving. So if you've been hating your inner critic your whole life and resisting it and telling it it's wrong, Try this instead and see how it works for you. Try loving your inner critic. Again, it's just a part of you. And the goal in life is to fully love and accept ourselves every single bit, and that includes our inner critic. All right, soul surfers, have you battled your inner critic your whole life? Have you spent your whole life hating your inner critic or trying to get it to shut up? Let me know in the comments your experience with your inner critic, and give this technique a shot and see if loving your inner critic helps at all. I truly think that this will be a pivotal thing for your inner critic, and your inner critic will see there's a different way to live, and soon enough you'll see you won't have to be battling your inner critic. Surrender to it, give it space, show it the love that you would like to receive, because after all, the inner critic is a part of you. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you liked what you saw in this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.